After 13 years of hostility and failure, Mike Ashley's acrid ownership of Newcastle United looks like it's finally over. Gone will be the hard-drinking, self-made billionaire, who will likely be replaced by very different owners. The Public Investment Fund, a sovereign wealth fund from Saudi Arabia chaired by the country's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and worth $320 billion. There was near universal joy at the news that Ashley's tenure was at an end. Of course, there's a long list of transgressions. 2 relegations, the traducing of club legends like Alan Shearer and Kevin Keegan, the renaming of St James's Park the Sports Direct Arena, and 13 years of financial drought that reduced the team to a life of mediocrity. Many supporters felt that Ashley had used the club as little more than an advertising hoarding for his retail empire, whilst putting in the absolute minimum amount of investment needed to keep the Premier League's TV riches rolling in. And finally though, after years of embarrassment, it looks like Ashley is on his way. Enter Newcastle's prospective owners. Saudi Arabia has the second largest oil reserves in the world. So, overnight, the purchase made Newcastle United the richest club in the world, owned effectively by one of its richest men. Yet most people have seen a different face to the bid. It's being led by Amanda Staveley, a British-born Dubai-based dealmaker. Born into a wealthy Yorkshire family, Staveley has made a name for herself thanks to a bulging contacts book that today has her trusted by some of the Middle East's wealthiest men. Famously, Staveley helped broker the 2008 deal that saw Sheikh Mansour buy Manchester City, and a few months later, Staveley and her PCP Capital partners helped broker a deal that brought Sheikh Mansour to Barclays Bank. The financial crisis was in full swing, and Barclays were desperately trying to raise funds to avoid being part nationalised. Staveley brought Sheikh Mansour to the table, who invested £3 billion alongside investment from Qatar, which saved the bank from having to go cap in hand to the government. Sheikh Mansour walked away with close to £3 billion worth of profit. Staveley made £30 million, but she felt that wasn't enough. Currently, PCP is suing Barclays Bank for £750 million worth of fees that they feel they are still owed. But Staveley will be more than just a broker for this deal. PCP is set to take a 10% stake in Newcastle and will likely run the day-to-day operations of the club. David and Simon Rubin, who are worth £18.664 billion and sit in second place on the 2019 Sunday Times Rich List, will also take 10%. But the other 80%, and effectively the club's true beneficial owner, will be Mohammed bin Salman, known universally as MBS. Last October, Staveley flew to MBS's £500 million mega yacht, the Serene, to resurrect a deal which at the time seemed to be losing momentum. Unsurprisingly, for a man who controls a bottomless pit of cash and the levers of power in the Desert Kingdom, the deal was quickly brought back on track, but this time with the powerful backing of the PIF. When MBS was anointed Crown Prince in 2017, he was initially hailed by allies in the region and the West as a moderate and as a reformer who wanted to quickly wean the country's economy off oil dependency, while loosening the tight social and religious restrictions on its growing young population. Here was a young ally who loved Margaret Thatcher and was inspired by the innovation of Apple, Google, and Microsoft. He liked to play computer games, and he had a taste for the finer things in life. He purchased what is believed to be the most expensive house in the world, in France, for $300 million. In 2017, he spent more on a single painting, £335 million on Leonardo da Vinci's Jesus Christ, than he is now set to on acquiring Newcastle United. But he also wanted to change Saudi Arabia's image. Now, there's long been criticism of Saudi Arabia's human rights record. It follows an ultra-conservative form of Islam called Wahhabism. There are heavy restrictions on women and a guardianship system that has created a form of gender apartheid. There is precious little democracy and virtually no freedom of speech. Reporters Without Borders' 2020 World Press Freedom Index places Saudi Arabia 170th out of 180 countries. It also routinely executes more people than almost any other country. In 2019, Saudi Arabia executed a record 184 people, some of them children at the time of their convictions, including 37 people executed on a single day. However, the Saudi authorities have just announced a ban on the executions of those convicted as children, as well as a ban on public floggings. Yet, any reforms have been tempered by crackdowns and accusations of abuses in other areas. MBS has also been accused of a litany of human rights atrocities, from pursuing an air war in Yemen that has killed tens of thousands of civilians to jailing Saudi activists, including women who had protested the kingdom's ban on women driving, to ordering the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a prominent Saudi critic and journalist for the Washington Post, at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. MBS was never meant to be a king. The House of Saud is a sprawling family of princes and princesses, all paid a stipend depending on their proximity to King Abdulaziz, known more widely as Ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. He had 36 sons and 27 daughters, and it's estimated that the family could number 15,000 members. But the throne only passes through the sons, and it took a series of deaths from sons and crown princes who passed away from poor health before the 25th son, Salman bin Abdulaziz, the governor of Riyadh, became king in 2015. MBS was King Salman's 6th but favourite son. Rather than travel abroad to study in Paris or London or New York, MBS stayed in Saudi Arabia, studied law in Riyadh, and became his father's advisor, staying by his side. When Salman bin Abdulaziz became king in 2015, MBS was rewarded. At the age of just 30, he was deputy crown prince and given the plum state portfolio of defence. What followed was a disastrous military campaign in Yemen after rebel Houthi forces, who the Saudis accuse of being proxies for their great regional rival Iran, took the capital of Sana'a, forcing the government into exile. Alongside his mentor, Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of the UAE and brother to Sheikh Mansour, and with support and weapons from the US and the UK, MBS oversaw a ruinous air campaign and naval blockade that killed thousands of civilians and starved much of the country. The Houthis still remain a powerful force 5 years later. And in 2017, he outmaneuvered his rivals to be named Crown Prince. Soon enough, the purges began, the most famous of which took place at the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. Overnight, hundreds of prominent Saudi businessmen and royal family members were seized and taken to the hotel, which had been transformed into a gilded prison. They were held for weeks until many signed over large parts of their fortunes. It was portrayed by MBS and his allies in the West as an anti-corruption crackdown designed to repatriate hundreds of billions of dollars back to state coffers. Saudi Arabia's vast oil wealth meant that graft was a significant problem, but one which had largely been accepted, especially in the West, as a cost of doing business. It just so happened that the people arrested were MBS's rivals during his rise to power. And after the Ritz-Carlton incident, MBS's power was almost unimpeachable. In a dewy-eyed profile of MBS by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, he denied that the move was a power grab. So you have to send a signal, and the signal going forward now is, "You will not escape," said MBS. The crackdown on the super-rich was welcomed in the kingdom and encapsulated two strands of MBS's approach. As the New York Times journalist Ben Hubbard wrote in his new book, MBS, The Rise to Power of Mohammed bin Salman, his rise has been dominated by two simultaneous drives. He has championed a vast social and economic overhaul in tandem with an extreme concentration of authoritarian power. Meanwhile, the rest of the world was being charmed by MBS. He became a key ally of US President Donald Trump and enjoyed a bromance with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. He was the face of Vision 2030, a vast plan to revolutionize the Saudi economy and diversify it away from oil. It was announced that cinemas would reopen after being closed at the behest of religious conservatives in the 1970s who believed they were un-Islamic. Concerts and WWE contests were hosted, as were boxing matches and high-profile sports events like the Italian and Spanish Super Cups. And it's also thought that Saudi money is the driving force behind FIFA's new Global Club World Cup. FIFA President Gianni Infantino welcomed MBS to the opening game of the 2018 World Cup, sitting between him and Vladimir Putin. Women were allowed into Saudi football matches for the first time, and the ban on women driving was lifted. Yet, at the same time, Saudi Arabia was jailing and allegedly torturing activists that spoke out against the regime, even on issues that MBS had taken credit for. Loujain El Hathloul, a feminist activist who'd campaigned for the lifting of the ban on women driving, was arrested whilst in the UAE and flown to Saudi Arabia. According to her family, she was tortured and threatened with rape. Her brother, now in exile in Canada, gave an interview with The Guardian. He claimed that her torture was overseen by Saud El-Qahtani, one of MBS's key allies and advisors at the time. She remains behind bars. The worst example, however, was the murder and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi journalist had once been a trusted palace insider, but fled the country fearing for his life. He had written critical articles about MBS and Saudi reform, which he continued to do so for the Washington Post. When he visited the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October 2018 to arrange the paperwork so that he could marry his Turkish fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, he was seized, tortured, and then dismembered with a bone saw. Now, despite Donald Trump running interference for MBS and the Saudi vehemently denying they had anything to do with Khashoggi's murder, the Saudis eventually admitted that he had been killed by rogue agents, many of whom were from MBS's inner circle. "I get all the responsibility because it happened under my watch," MBS later said in an interview with PBS Frontline. Saud El-Qahtani was again implicated. The US placed sanctions on him too, but a Saudi court cleared El-Qahtani of any wrongdoing. "That is the antithesis of justice and an unacceptable lack of respect to the victims," said Agnes Calmar, the UN's Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary or arbitrary killings. The CIA later concluded that MBS likely did order the killing. As the Washington Post wrote, quoting a US official, "The CIA sees MBS as a good technocrat, but also as volatile and arrogant. Someone who goes from 0 to 60 and doesn't seem to understand that there are some things you can't do." Now, MBS is of course not the first Gulf monarch to buy a football club. Both Qatar, with the 2022 World Cup and PSG, and the UAE with their purchase of Manchester City, have invested heavily in the game. And they weren't interested in profit. They were after something else. Reputation laundering, sports washing, and the chance to offer an alternative story about the country to the rest of the world. There is no greater billboard than televised European football, especially in the Premier League and Champions League, and the Saudi state now appears to want a part of that. There's already been a heated online debate about the sale, invoking Saudi Arabia's appalling human rights record. And although there is no ethical dimension to the Premier League owners and directors test, they do still have the power to stop the deal. The test was beefed up during the wave of Chinese investment over the past few years. Southampton's prospective owner Zhao Zhisheng had admitted to bribing officials in China 10 years earlier, but rather than do time, he turned state's witness. Now, that was enough for the purchase to be held up, and a new clause was added to the test, covering the failure of a prospective owner to hand over all relevant financial information, and, most importantly to Newcastle United and PIF, a clause that states that a crime committed in another state, even if not prosecuted there, could be a disqualifying matter. But that would cause a diplomatic earthquake. Saudi Arabia is a staunch ally of the United Kingdom. MBS has shaken hands with the Queen and her government, and until September last year, when a British court halted the practice, the country had been sold billions of pounds in arms, which were then used against the civilian population in Yemen. Billions of pounds are also invested in London real estate, and here is a fund and a man willing to invest money during the greatest economic contraction in the country's history. So, Newcastle fans have a point when they question the moral outrage over the purchase of their club, particularly given the comparative reaction to BAE Systems selling £15 billion worth of arms and military equipment to Saudi Arabia over the past 5 years. The priority for many was simply to get Ashley out, replaced by anyone with the resources to rebuild and burnish what had been sullied. But the Saudi takeover could just as much sully and burnish the club's reputation. If football was to have a line in the sand over the moral probity of its owners, you'd be hard-pressed to find a clearer one than the Saudi state being allowed to buy a Premier League football club. As Amnesty International wrote in a letter to the Premier League Chief Executive Richard Masters on April the 21st, unless the Premier League pauses and looks seriously at the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, it risks becoming a patsy, a willing dupe of those trying to sportswash their abysmal human rights records. And no one alleges the intention behind such a purchase with more clarity than Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. I can say that the one incident that has hurt the reputation of Saudi Arabia the most was Jamal's murder. It continues to. It has destroyed his reputation. And he's desperately trying to use these types of deals to repair his image. If the UK and the Premier League accept him, it shows other countries that he is now accepted. Today's video is paired with a written piece by the same author. To take the story further, read more from James Montague's interview with Hatice Cengiz, and to answer the question, why does the PIF fund want to buy Newcastle United, you can get a free trial to The Athletic. Your support enables us to make more videos like today's. Thank you for watching.